go ahead and keep going. So today's dialogue will focus on the documentary Seaspiracy, not to criticize, but to extrapolate the misconceptions about the movie and discuss the in-depth processes that happens in the ocean surrounding the topics of fisheries, overfishing, and marine protected areas and more. We are welcome here today by our dynamic group of panelists that will provide further insight about the ocean's processes and the work that they do surrounding the ocean. So first, I'm gonna start with Danny Washington. So who are you and what do you do?
Thanks, DeMarcus. Well, it's really great to be here with everyone. Thanks for making the time on a Friday night to hang out and talk about the ocean. I'm always down for that. And yeah, I currently work in science communication full time. I started my career with my Bachelor of Science degree in marine biology from the University of Miami, but then moved on to start creating videos for K through 12 education, everything from textbooks. That's where I got my start, all the way to national television shows, including shows for CBS, Fox, Discovery Channel, and Science Channel. And so my job is essentially to be that middle point between our brilliant academic realm and the general public, especially young kids. That's really my specialty. And I love what I do. I love what I do. And I try to create conversation around the ocean and why it's so important and create that connection. That's really the most important thing to me, is to see more human beings feeling a natural and authentic connection to the sea and the ocean, the seas and the ocean. So I'll pass it off to Paul.
Thanks, Danny. So I'm Paul Barber. I'm a professor of ecology and evolutionary biology at UCLA, and I've spent the last 20 years of my career or so studying the oceans, largely in coral reef environments. But you know, one of the regions that I've worked a lot is the Coral Triangle, which is the most diverse and most threatened coral reef environment in the world. And I've spent a lot of time doing science capacity building to try to increase the number of people, particularly people in Indonesia, who can study those reefs so that they can be advocates for their own resources. And yeah, thank you for having us here tonight, DeMarcus.
No problem, and thank you guys for both coming. I really do appreciate it. So let's go ahead and get the conversation started. So this is a meeting format, so it's kind of like a dialogue type of conversation. And so please, audience members, get engaged, ask questions for things that you don't know about. There's a whole host of knowledge here. There's also people in that audience who are also ocean experts. And so feel free to also provide, some information. And if you have any links to drop or any content, please put it in chat so that people can follow, especially if you're talking about topics that we can't really dive too deep into because of the time. So let's go ahead and get started. Before Seaspiracy, how much did you know about the ocean and ocean health and problems relating to the ocean? So this question is open to both the audience members and the panelists. So pretty much, what did you know? Did you know about the different topics presented in Seaspiracy, and how did you feel about it afterwards?
I'm happy to kick this off. So I know that for me, the ocean has been a lifelong passion, and I consider myself a forever student of ocean science, as I learned from experts and understanding all the groundbreaking research that's being done around the world. And so I've been aware of, specifically the overfishing issue for at least, 8 years now, majority of my 20s into now my 30s, and working to combat that concept of like, why are we overfishing? How is it happening? What are the mechanisms that are creating this? I've learned so much along the way. But the main thing is, when I watched Seaspiracy, I felt as though there was so much cherry-picked information. There was a lot of pointing fingers and blaming certain people and entities and organizations that it just felt really unfair. And so for me, when I watched the film, I was quite upset at the end, really, really angry actually, because I didn't think the full story was properly told. And unfortunately, as someone who works in TV and in storytelling like this, I can really pick out a lot of moments where there were things that were like just, put together in a way that followed the narrative that they wanted, but maybe didn't necessarily match with the actual story from that person. And that's unfortunate, because when you have that kind of audience, it's like, how are you empowering people? How are you uplifting people and their voices? And that to me is the most important thing when doing documentary work. But what it did do was it started conversations. We wouldn't be here tonight if they hadn't released that film. So I am grateful for that, and I think it has raised a general overall awareness of these issues in the ocean.
Yeah, I don't know, like having watched it, you know, even calling it a documentary in some ways I find is a bit of a stretch, because well, I'll back up 1 second. There are a lot of really important issues that Seaspiracy raises. Overfishing, huge issue. You know, so many of our commercial fish stocks are overfished, on the verge of being overfished. There's a very, very small percentage of them that are considered healthy. Issues of plastics in the ocean, whether that's microplastics from toothpastes and cosmetics and other things, whether it's plastic bags or straws, whether it's ghost nets, all of those are a problem. Persistent organic pollutants, you know, in the sea. When I teach my intro marine science class, you know, and we talk about these, you know, the issues of chemical contamination in the marine environment. You know, I say that, you know, it's kind of ironic that, you know, we might make the fish so unhealthy to eat that that's what ultimately, you know, tuna may be saved by it being too unhealthy for us to eat because of, you know, the mercury, because of, I mean, there's like fire retardants and all sorts of other persistent organic pollutants. So, you know, the issues of illegal and unregulated fisheries, you know, the mistreatment of fishermen, all of these things are very legitimate concerns. And you know, and I think that the fact that they bring these up and we're talking about them is important. I think where the problem really comes in is that it's done in a way that isn't really, it takes a very simplistic view of everything. It's like, you know, all of this stuff is bad, and what we need to do is shut everything down. And the world's a little more complicated than that. So, you know, it's like, all right, so if we gave you the button where you could press a button and like all fishing stops tomorrow, what are the 3 billion people that are eating that fish going to have for dinner tomorrow? You know, what's your plan for that? And, you know, I think that rather than saying, here's a problem and here's the villains, and there's only one solution, which is we have to shut everything down, you know, I think it's more constructive to talk about there's a lot of issues, and that means that, you know, the solutions are going to be complex, and we need to balance the needs of the environment and achieving sustainability, because we honestly need to achieve sustainability in the ocean. You know, it is our life support system and it is absolutely critical. But I think it takes such an extreme view to everything that it may resonate with some people, but I think there's a lot of people who would be willing to engage more in this issue that after watching that would just walk away and say, oh man, they're just a bunch of crazy people. And what we need is we need everyone to be contributing to the solution, not to have a bunch of, you know, extreme a bunch of extreme views being adopted by a very small number of people, because that's not going to get us the change that we need to achieve the sustainability that we all want to see.
I completely agree. Does anybody else from the audience have any comments?
I can give a comment here, if which I just kind of put in the chat there, but I agreed with Paul in the sense of like I'm not a filmmaker, and not to criticize how the film unfolded, but it seemed like it had a flow of being very dichotomous. It was this, and then I discovered it was that, and it sent me in this direction. And then it was this, and then it was that, and it sent me in this direction. And so like some of those dichotomies felt forced at times. And like Paul mentioned the plastics, and that there was a scene where that really came to fruition for me, where it was like he was really pushing the issue of these plastics are from the fisheries. And I forget what the NGO was, but the woman was saying, well, from the studies, we know that they're microplastics. And he was like, well, they're from the fisheries, they're not microplastics. And it's like, well, the fisheries stuff becomes microplastics. So there was a whole nuance there where it was like, I think you're both on the same page, but there was this sort of forced dichotomy of like pushing the fisheries at that moment. So I agree that so many important topics came up, and it piqued my interest in many ways, but some of those moments were like felt a little forced in terms of it's got to be this or that, and like Paul said, I think that might be a turnoff to some people, this really heavy dichotomous view.
Yeah, Eric, that part that I think you're referencing was with the Plastic Pollution Coalition, and Deanna and Jackie, who work there, are part of that team. Deanna co-founded the organization. They're actually friends of mine. When I watched them in the film, it was hard. It was really, really hard to watch, because initially when I saw her image in the preview, which was like the little teaser, I was like, okay, Deanna's in it. It's legit. Like it's gonna be it should be a good one. And then I watched how it played out, and I just recognized like how unfair it was for the reason of their cherry picking of that information. I can't tell you how hard PPC works to bring people together. They're a coalition. They're not an individual organization. They actually bring other organizations together to work on the plastic pollution problem. And it's something that's needed. And we already know, like, as Paul said, the ocean has so many different issues that we have to tackle at the same time. And it's a multifaceted approach. There's no one idea, one solution that we can decide and define. It doesn't make sense. So I think by bringing up those conversations and bringing people into that conversation without truly letting them talk about the work that they're doing in the proper light and define their own narrative is just not a cool move.
Yeah, and it extends. I mean, the plastic thing was pretty atrocious, but I think also, the attack on the Marine Stewardship Council and the dolphin safe labeling. It's like, if you look at how much these practices have reduced the fatalities of dolphins and the capture of dolphins as bycatch, they've been incredibly successful. And so, when you drive around in your car, like seat belts and airbags, they save lives. Those are important safety features of a car. Does it prevent every fatality? No, absolutely not. But does it not make your car safer? Absolutely it does. And so, to criticize an organization and practices that, I think the figure that I remember, I don't have the exact number, but it's somewhere, it's around 95%, reduction in the killing of dolphins and porpoises in some of these fisheries. That's a huge reduction. That's important. And to belittle that progress and to say, well, if you can't save every dolphin, like there are going to be dolphins that die if ship strikes, even if you don't have them caught in long lines or nets. And so to say that, like, if any dolphin ever gets injured or killed as part of a fishery, you can't call it dolphin safe. It's like, I think it's such an extreme position that it doesn't allow people to actually invest in the solutions that are actually making a lot of progress. And if you're going to turn people off of these very effective solutions, I think you're actually doing more harm than good at that point.
Yeah, I agree. And I felt like when I had watched the movie, and I had to watch it for a second time because the first time I saw it, I was like, just digesting everything. The second time I saw it was after reading articles and kind of understanding people's viewpoint. And for people that really don't know so much about the ocean, it's a very large place. And so I think part of it that a few people had mentioned in chat was like the government oversight. And so I think that's something that's kind of wasn't even mentioned in terms of the political aspects of the ocean. So these things are called ocean policy. So at least in the state of California, like a couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to talk to two individuals that work for the state of California as it relates to ocean policy. And as they discussed the complexity of just simply, I think the topic I brought up was desalinization. So desalinization is the process of taking salt water out the ocean and producing fresh water. And it's, at least in California, it's been a lot of blowback from it. And then them explaining just the simple idea of just having a permit is a lot of political aspects to it. And if we start talking about like marine protected areas and things like that, those get very, very, very complex because you have to distinguish why you're doing this, the type of marine protected areas, and whatnot. And so that's one thing that I wish the movie would have probably tackled was the complexity of the politics that come with it, and also understanding that because of how governance work, we can't really control, what other countries do. We can place sanctions, we can do other things like that, but we can't just go in there and say, hey, you need to stop, blah, blah, blah. And so there also needs to be an understanding of that, but also understanding like, what are the things that have changed since we discovered this? Also with the movie, I saw that it tackled various trendy topics about the ocean. So coral reefs is a constant thing that's constantly in the news. I've learned that talking about finning is a thing that happens that pops up every now and then, not really even considering the fact that these Caribbean countries also participate, or that in some of these shops in Miami and Florida, you can go buy like these fish fins and things like that. So it's a worldwide issue that needs to really be tackled and really needs to be understood. That it's not only one player. It's not just, oh well, if they're not doing it, then they're the reason that this is happening. And so this is something that is needs to be further explained and talked about more, and things like that. So yeah, so we're going to keep on going. And so one of the key things that the movie had touched on was the idea of sustainability. I remember back when I was in undergrad and as an environmental science student, sustainability was a word that was it wasn't really thrown around, but it was in the concept was how can we take what we do and reduce either the waste or how we contribute our carbon footprint or something like that, and still have the same amount of output. One of the things that the movie had mentioned, well, or came up with the idea of that sustainability doesn't quite exist. And so I was wondering for the panelists, could you explain like what do you think about sustainability, and are there sustainable solutions that are available as it relates to fisheries marine protected areas, or just even being conservative about how we use the ocean?
Well, I'd say, sustainability is defined by different people in different ways, depending on your lifestyle, your background, where you come from. And so for me, sustainability does definitely exist. And the way that I personally define it is, how am I making choices today that I know will impact 7 generations to come? So I'm leaning on the indigenous wisdom and knowledge that's been passed down from indigenous tribes from around the world, who have been the protectors of this earth space that we live in for thousands of years prior to colonization and the Industrial Revolution. They have the real answers as to how we're going to protect and make sure this place continues. In Palau, the Islands of Palau, they have a concept of bul, where the indigenous tribes at that time knew, you see an area that's been overfished and the fish aren't returning in the same numbers as they were, we stop fishing. We close off that area and we leave it alone until nature recovers itself. And that to me is like the essence of sustainability. It's like paying attention to the things that we're consuming, looking at what's being depleted and being exploited and extracted. And once you recognize that that's where the status is of that thing and that resource, then it's like, okay, the next step is, what are you going to do to fix it? What are you going to do to change that? And that's a question I think we all have to ask ourselves individually and collectively on the daily. And so, yeah, I think, and on top of that, within the film itself, I think that it really employed this white savior mentality, this like, I'm going to rescue the people of the global South. I'm going to, come in and to fix all this. And that's just not going to happen. Again, we have to rely on indigenous wisdom. And I'm sure most of the people that we know that live in the global South, they've got more wisdom than all of us combined. They've got this artisanal practice that has lasted them for thousands of years. So we need to lean on that.
Yeah, and I think, in terms of sustainability, some of the things that are really overlooked in the movie, one is, the government subsidies that are going into supporting these fisheries. One of the reasons why so many of these fisheries are as large as they are and are harvesting as much as they are is that the governments are propping up these industries, and they're they are sustaining an industry that is making the ocean less sustainable. And so but there's a balance there, because one of the reasons the governments are doing this is 2 reasons: jobs and food security. And so we need to take a broad view of what sustainability is. And that also includes, it's not just what we're taking out of the ocean, but it's what we're putting into the ocean. And so one of the really, well, among the many major threats to the ocean, ocean acidification. So many things that live in the ocean, so many phytoplankton, have calcium carbonate based skeletons that, as ocean pH drops, they do not survive and reproduce at the same rates. And one of the statistics that the movie got wrong, like right off the bat, was that oceans produce 80% of the oxygen we breathe. That's not true. It's about half. That's still a lot. That's a really important amount. And if ocean acidification reduces the ability of these phytoplankton communities to be as productive as they have in the past, not only does it reduce the amount of oxygen that's being released into our atmosphere that we depend on, but it's also producing less primary production that the zooplankton feed on, that the small fish feed on, that the larger fish feed on. I mean, these phytoplankton are the base of these pelagic food chains. And so if you have a significant reduction in primary productivity in the ocean because of all the carbon dioxide that we're pumping into the atmosphere, that has a huge impact on the sustainability of the ocean, particularly with respect to the ability of the ocean to have productivity, well, populations that are sustainable, that allow us to be sustainable as well. And so I think there needs to be a much broader view of what sustainability is.
Gotcha. Could you, I know you hadn't mentioned ocean acidification, so I know what it is. I think most ocean folks that's here do, but can you like further explain what that is as it relates to like carbon and CO2 and climate change? Like what is ocean acidification?
Yeah, so basically when carbon dioxide gets incorporated into water, you form a mild acid called carbonic acid. And so as CO2, most people are pretty aware of the issue of increasing CO2 levels. Substantial number of people understand how that relates to rising global temperatures. But as you know, most of that excess CO2 that we're pumping into the atmosphere is being absorbed into the oceans. And when that CO2 goes into the ocean, it forms that mild acid, carbonic acid, and it lowers the pH. And the problem is that, you know, as kids, I bet all of us at one point took some baking soda and some vinegar and we mixed it together and it bubbles up. Those bubbles are carbon dioxide because the bicarbonate of soda is this, is reacting with the acid and releasing the CO2 as a gas. And so as you have these organisms, particularly the phytoplankton, but also things like corals, things like, you know, any gastropod with a shell, a clam, a snail, things like that, they all have calcium carbonate skeletons. And so, you know, you can take a clamshell and put it into vinegar, and that will start releasing the CO2 that is trapped in that shell. And the thing is just like we depend on our skeletons to be able to survive, you know, if your skeleton suddenly disappeared, you would suffocate. Okay, you would suffocate under your own mass. The same thing is true in the marine environment. If these organisms do not have their calcium carbonate skeletons, if they cannot develop them to the same extent that they would normally, they do not survive and reproduce to the same extent. And so by increasing the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, we are gradually making the ocean more acidic, and that makes it much harder for all of these organisms that have calcium carbonate skeletons to survive and reproduce. And a lot of those are the base of really important marine food webs.
Gotcha. Thank you for that explanation. And so I'm going to keep going ahead. I did see a question in the chat, and then I was wondering if you guys probably could answer this, but it's pretty much looking at, sorry. It says plastic from Miss Michelle McElroy. Plastic seems like it's a small issue compared to mass capture and killings. Think of fish. What's being done on the global level with the world's Navy or the Coast Guard? Is this even on the radar? So like, what are these institutions doing as relates to the mass capture and killing? So think.
So in terms of the EEZ, the exclusive economic zone that exists for each nation, 200 nautical miles from the shoreline, that's jurisdiction for the Navy, our Navy, and the Coast Guard. But beyond that, it's kind of a free-for-all. And that is the biggest, I think, the core dilemma that we're dealing with right now. It's the tragedy of the commons. It's a place where people, it's a no man's land, but everybody wants to take advantage of it. And enforcement is lacking. that is really what's causing this massive issue. Whatever boats are out there, they're doing whatever they want. As you saw in the film, Sea Shepherd was one of the organizations that was featured, and they're doing some of that enforcement work. They're a super controversial organization. A lot of people do not like what they do, but honestly, they're doing the work that nobody wants to do. So until nations come together and decide on a unified enforcement protocol and strategy, this is what this situation is going to remain.
Gotcha. And I know that I remember there was a report a while ago that had mentioned like the Navy's practices also, because of what they do in the ocean, they also kill sharks. And so, you know, we also have, I guess, hands in the blood or the water or whatever the saying is, as it relates to how we affect the ocean and things like that. But also I do want to point like the audience to there are governments and organizations that, you know, that's part of their purpose. So NOAA is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They have various divisions that, you know, that do research and education as it relates to these issues and provides policy. So like ocean acidification that we just talked on, also has fisheries management, something that the movie didn't have any fisheries experts. So these are people, in a sense, they manage fisheries and are the ones that have these sustainable practices as it relates to fisheries and things like that. And so we'll keep on going. Any comments for anybody? Any questions from the you know, panelists or the group?
Well, I just want to follow up quickly on that sort of enforcement and oversight question, because, you know, the world's, so the surface area of the oceans of the world, you know, it's 500 million square kilometers. So if you have 1 million fishing vessels out there, that means you have one fishing vessel for every 500 square kilometers. And, you know, how do you enforce that? I mean, it's a logistical challenge, because, you know, there are only so many. I mean, we live in LA. There's so many people on the freeway. You know, when they can go fast enough, everyone is going over the speed limit because there's so many more cars than there are police officers to pull people over. And so basically everyone knows that it's like, hey, you know, I'm basically safe because the odds of me getting pulled over are so low, because there's like, you know, one cop for every 10,000 cars. And so if you have one Coast Guard vessel for every 10,000, you know, fishing vessels, and they're spread over 500 million square kilometers, you know, it's like, it's really difficult to enforce. And so, I mean, we really need to think about enforcement. And yes, you can enforce at the ports. There's lots of issues with, like, you have legal vessels meeting up with unregulated illegal fishing vessels. They transfer catches and they bring them in, and now it looks like it's legal. I mean, it's basically the equivalent of money laundering with fish. And so it's a real challenge. And you know, I think that technology has developed enough where we could do a lot better if we wanted to. And so I think that there are ways where we could do much better in terms of monitoring these fisheries.
Thank you. We have a hand raised from the chat. Tierra Wicks, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the technologies that can be used to patrol these different fishing industries. Like, why haven't satellites or drones or any other aerial technologies been utilized? And where could we go to like work on enforcing that? Is that something through Congress or anything like that?
Any other panelists want to speak on that? That's outside my expertise.
So there actually are programs where they're starting to do satellite tracking of fishing vessels, and they it's been a while since I've seen a presentation on this, but if I recall right, they are using satellites and AI to basically look at the movement of these vessels in the ocean. And just in the same way that, you know, a smartwatch, you know, knows if you're like running or you're sleeping or you're swimming because of the movements of the accelerometer in the watch, the AI can actually learn how these vessels are moving in the ocean. And, you know, a vessel that is engaged in purse seining has a very characteristic movement. A vessel that is deploying and retrieving long lines has a very characteristic movement. If you have a large factory processing ship that is receiving illegal, unregulated catches from a large number of boats, you know, that has a certain pattern. And so they actually are starting to use this technology and try to use that in enforcement. You know, the challenge, of course, does become that enforcement, because if you've got a vessel 1,000 miles off of the coast that you can say is engaged in some sort of illegal fishing activity, you know, you can deploy a vessel to go intercept it, but 1,000 miles in the ocean is a long way to go. It takes a long time to cover that amount of ground. And so, you know, it becomes really challenging to actually, you know, how do you intercept that vessel and have it boarded and, you know, hold these people to account. But I think it's something that people are they're working on more. But you know, that the ocean is a large place with unique challenges.
And as it relates, oh, Danny, do you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I was searching for this link to share with you, Tara, but my friend Jeremy McCain, he's a entrepreneur and ocean advocate out of Texas, and he works a lot in tech, and he has a collaboration with his company OCN, which they're using blockchain technology to basically drive more collection of raw data through these autonomous like little vessels. They're like mini little boats, but they're using satellite technology and connecting, and yeah, it's a whole system. So I put the link in the chat. You can check it out. That's something that might be fascinating for you to read through. But that's honestly the only type of yeah, technology that I've heard about that is that seems to be viable. But I don't know where they are as far as scaling at this moment.
Gotcha. All right. So I have about 2 more questions, and we really can get to questions and comments. I see a couple in the chat. So as it relates to the ocean, so what do you both do as it relates to the ocean? And then what are some solutions that that you have seen or heard about that can help, you know, different aspects of the oceans and the health of the oceans? We can start with Danny, if that's okay.
So when you say what I do with the oceans, like how do I recreate in the ocean, or what am I doing to help provide solutions?
Yeah, what do you do to provide solutions in the ocean? Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, first of all, I mean, through my day job, I'm constantly on this ride, this roller coaster ride of taking in a lot of information that's out in the world about ocean conservation and doing my best to translate it in a way that makes sense for mostly kids. So to me, that's one of the most challenging things to do, because it's a distillation process, and you're just like, okay, how do I say this where it makes sense and it's still fun and it's engaging for them? So that's my constant journey, and that's one of my biggest contributions to the ocean. I want to see the next generation of young people feel and believe that they are directly connected to the ocean, and that they have not ownership, but that they have a stake in this game, and that they're a part of this journey, and they need to be able to explore this place. You know, so that's really the main part. But the second part, on the daily, I personally choose not to eat fish, and that's been the case for me for the last 4 years. Under one exception, I will eat lionfish tacos when I'm in a local place that has been spearfished, I will do that. Last time I did it was in Belize, end of 2019, and they were delicious. So, you know, as an exotic invasive species, I'm gonna eat that, and I know that it's been caught in a way that wasn't detrimental to the reef, because you can only catch them with a spearfish, spear rod or whatever. So, yeah, those are my two main things. But other than that, just reducing single-use consumption, single-use plastic consumption. It's impossible to get away from plastic at this point in our society. It's everywhere. If you want to eat anything, even vegetables, you encounter plastic. And so it's like, I'm searching right now to figure out what material scientists can I speak to. I know that there are a couple of companies that are on the rise that are looking at alternative packaging material, but it's not fast enough. So how do we amplify these stories and, you know, find a way to push governments and local city, you know, municipalities to look at their waste management and also what they're allowing to be included in these packaging materials. So yeah, it's a lot, but I think every action counts, and it's just a matter of getting started wherever you are with whatever you have.
Yeah, you know, I think it's a matter of, like, you know, trying to bring in as many people as possible. You know, if everyone does a little, you can accomplish a lot. And, you know, I think, you know, particularly, I mean, you know, we don't eat fish that often. You know, try to reduce the use of plastics, you know, herbicides, pesticides, you know, don't have a lawn, you know, because all of those things run off into the ocean. But I think it's really important to engage a broader range of people in these discussions, because you know, particularly in the United States and in Europe, United States in particular, it's like, you know, access to the ocean, you know, has been something that is, you know, for wealthy people and white people. And, you know, for a very long time, people of color were actively excluded from going to the ocean. They're actively excluded from going to swimming pools. And, you know, even though those policies ended, you know, 50 plus years ago, you still see a major disparity in the rates of drowning of people of color and white people. And so, you know, one of the things that I've been doing for a while is trying to diversify marine science, try to bring in more voices from more places, whether it's training scientists, you know, Indonesian scientists in Indonesia, because they don't have the opportunities necessarily to come to other parts of the world that have more scientific knowledge and infrastructure. You know, whether it's our summer program, the diversity project, that is, you know, bringing more diversity, more diverse voices into marine science. You know, like, we have to get more people involved, because if we don't have more people involved, if more people don't care, we can't make the changes that we need to have the kind of impact that's required. And so, you know, rather than, and you know, ultimately that was my biggest frustration with this movie, is that, you know, it was trying to convert a small number of people into taking, you know, a very extreme action. It's like, you know what, just don't eat fish. And it's like, okay, first of all, that's not enough. But, you know, if you get 1 out of 100 people to say, you know what, I saw this documentary, I'm no longer going to eat fish. Okay, that's great. You can reduce the amount of fish consumption by 1%. If you could convince everyone to eat 10% less fish, you'd have a 10 times bigger impact, because you could reduce the fish consumption globally by 10%. And so, like, what would you rather do? Have a small number of people take the most extreme actions, or get more people to do something that's more moderate? And if you can get more people on board, you're going to have a bigger impact. And that's what we need to have right now. We need to have the biggest impact as possible. And that means bringing people in and engaging them in the process. And rather than making them feel like villains, making them think like that they're good people, that now that they have this information, they can make better choices and do something that's proactive. But I just, I think that there's so many people that watch this and just like got turned off from the whole idea of protecting the oceans and engaging in this important work because of how it was framed.
And yeah, DeMarcus, were you gonna say something?
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna acknowledge Sochi's question in the chat where she's asking, what are some things we as science communicators can take away from Seaspiracy, the visuals, the tone, the framing, and what are some things that are harmful in the tone? Yeah, possibly too dark. I would say number one, I think the positives would be the style of the storytelling. It was edited in a way that was fast paced, to the point. All of the stats that were referenced were short and bold on screen. So it was like, here it is, boom, boom, boom. And then I would say also, of course, having it incorporated the idea of the hero's journey. So that to me is always a win. Whenever you're storytelling, you got to have that focal point main character that the audience is traveling with on the journey. What I think the things that were harmful were the villainization, as you mentioned, Paul, like villainizing people because of what they do and their involvement in the topic. It's like, you can't do that, and you can't cherry pick information. So that definitely to me was a big like downfall. And then also I think just making sure to show diversity, true diversity, and that everyone had a stake and a voice in the film. So I think he missed a lot of great opportunities to showcase solutions, real solutions, all the things that are happening right now. I know they featured one at the end, but it wasn't enough time for the audience to feel and recognize and know that this is a huge problem. But then what do we do about it? And to me, I felt like giving up. I was like, humans don't deserve this place. I don't know what we're here for. Like, for the first time in a long time, I felt apathy, like in my gut after I watched the film. And that was not a good feeling, because we know that too many people who don't have enough information will succumb to that apathy. And the only antidote to that is action. And you have to give people solutions.
And I think like in terms of, a documentary, in terms of storytelling, if you haven't seen Chasing Corals, I'd recommend watching that as a better example of what you can do. I think they told a better story. I thought they told a more complete story. They brought in voices from all over the world. It's still depressing as hell. It's difficult to watch.
I cry every time I watch Chasing Coral. Yeah.
But they give some, they do give advice at the end. It's like, little things that you can do. It's like, if you can get your grandmother to do one small thing that's going to help the oceans that she wasn't doing before, that's a win. Because
Definitely.
we all have grandmothers, we all have parents, we all have little brothers and sisters or whatnot. And if we can get everyone involved, that's the key. It's like, the oceans are big. It's a big place. It's a big problem. It's a big world. We need everyone on board. And so let's provide a pathway for everyone to get on board rather than roadblocks. And watch Chasing Corals. It's depressing, but
it gives solutions.
It's a much better example of what you can do with documentary filmmaking to be productive, rather than what I felt Seaspiracy was.
And I would say my friend Christy, she goes by Brown Girl Green on Instagram. She made a really great infographic that y'all can reference, but she summarized a bunch of other documentaries that are solution oriented, helpful, informative, which include The Outlaw Ocean, which is based on the writings of Ian Urbina, who's a prolific journalist, and there's also The End of the Line, which is a good one. Ghost Fleet: The Story of Plastic. I know the producers of that doc, and that was really well done. And then For Fish and Ocean Recovery. So those are just a handful of different docs. I can put the link in the chat if you all want to check it out.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
I wonder if it's all right, touch base on that question. Thank you so much, everyone, for providing such great answers and such a wonderful resource to move towards. I want to go back to thinking about storytelling and villainization, especially since to really captivate audiences, the storytelling elements, especially the ones that you mentioned, Danny, having a main protagonist, having a villain, essentially, is a good way to keep people interested. But I think we find sometimes that we are the villain in our ocean story. Yeah. And so I guess this is a question without an answer, but just thinking about how to really use those beautiful storylines and thinking about, what are the inner conflicts that we're dealing with, and moving towards kind of like a healing space. Because I know that now, in the wake of this documentary, we have a rallied environmental community now looking at each other with different points of view on this topic, where I feel that, oh wow, it was so great, everyone's on the track to maybe like not using less straws, but now it's like, oh well, should you or shouldn't you? And so I'm just thinking about the villainization and how division is not helpful moving forward. And I think, unfortunately, there might be some division created by these kinds of narratives. And how can we move forward in doing better and thinking about storytelling?
Sochi, thank you for being here, by the way. We haven't connected in a while. I wanted to just say, a real example that happened to me yesterday, in fact. So this week, collaborated with a friend of mine, again on Instagram, who has a significant following. She's got like over 400,000 people who follow her lessons. She teaches lessons about various topics. And her name is Blair Imani, and she's incredible. I've been following her for a long time. And then she reached out to me a couple of weeks ago, said, hey, let's collaborate on one of my lessons, which are 30 seconds long. They're real. And for her to post the thing that we created together, it was just a dynamic video back and forth of us just giving some tips, solutions related to creating a plastic-free ocean. She was attacked yesterday. She was straight up attacked, specifically, and I can say this with fact because you can see the different profiles that come onto your page and comment and send you DMs. They were predominantly white vegans who took the message from the movie and took it as a fact that we should not be focusing on reducing plastic consumption at all. That's not the priority, and like came after her. And this is someone who doesn't have a background in this space, but was willing enough to use her platform to create this storyline, in honor of Earth Day. And it was just really sad because she was so upset. And then on top of that, this week, having to deal with all of the violent police behavior and the loss of the young lady in Ohio, like that was weighing heavy on all of us. She's a woman of color, I'm a woman of color. And it was like, yo, like you're coming after us like this? Like, stop. We're not out here trying to tell people to use plastic or to start eating fish. That you're treating us as though we're the direct enemy. And like you said, Joshi, it's about, villainizing people. You can't do that. But I do have a silver lining to the story. She decided to reshoot her portion of the video and reframe the story, and then acknowledge the fact that this is not okay. Don't come on my page and do that. And also, here's where the origins of plastic came from, and gave a little bit of history. So she did that, and she was brave enough to come back around and try it again. Most people wouldn't even try because of just that. And it's like, show compassion. That's really, I think, the core bottom line about storytelling is how do you show compassion to others and compassion to your audience?
Yeah, wow. Thank you so much for sharing. And yes, I know that we've all been feeling like very mixed about things these days, and villainizing each other is not the way. And yes, I love the idea of, showing ourselves compassion and showing each other compassion as we're moving forward and we're all learning. So yeah, thanks for that.
Welcome.
Thank you both for, go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say, like, when you get to the point where like we're fighting on how to save the ocean, like then we've all lost.
So like, what are
Exactly.
some what are some solutions? Because I think Ms. Michelle McElroy had posted, like, what are some organizations that we can get in front of or get behind? Please send links in the chat. And also we can also open up to questions and answers as well. So like, what are some organizations that we can get behind, and what are some solutions that we can do for the ocean? We can go ahead and start.
I have my highest recommendation would be intersectional environmentalists. They're not necessarily a nonprofit yet. I think they're working on a nonprofit arm, but right now they're a media company that is constantly teaching about different elements of environmentalism and how, and the history of it and how we can move forward in an intersectional way. So highly recommend following them on social. And then the other one that I would recommend that I mentioned earlier is Ian Urbina and The Outlaw Ocean. I think that his reporting is super fair. I think it's clear. He gives you actionable steps. And I think he just started like this new, it's like a subscription where you pay like $5 for the year, and then you get to be a part of his constant reporting, which is really interesting. And so I want to support journalists like that.
I think that there's a lot of local organizations as well, depending on where you are, that can have a really big impact and need the support. I know in Los Angeles, Heal the Bay has been transformative in terms of the health of Santa Monica Bay, the quality of the water, and that all started just by deciding that they're going to go out, take a sample of the water, measure the bacteria on it, and put online a report card of the water quality from A to F, something that people in the U.S. can relate to, as a report card. And they've made a big difference. And there are organizations like this all over. I know a student who just finished up her PhD up at the University of Alaska Anchorage, that's working with a nonprofit now that is focused on ocean conservation, working with First Nation people up in Alaska, and using traditional indigenous knowledge to help revive, restore, and protect these ecosystems. And so they're the big they're the Sea Shepherds, the TNCs, the Oceanias of the world. Yes, they're these big NGOs, but I think if you are in a local space, look for those groups that are working in your region and really try to support them, because I think that those groups can have a really major impact in the areas that they're working in, and don't necessarily get the same level of support as these larger NGOs.
Yeah, I think one of our panelists, who was supposed to be here, Marseille, I think that's how you pronounce it, but she has a conservation group called Azul, and so that's based in California, and that's something that's like local that you can kind of get a part of to kind of be part of the solution and community-based solutions here in Los Angeles. And if you're in different states like Florida or the Gulf, I'm pretty sure there's organizations there. And if you're in a landlocked state, even though you don't have a direct connection to the ocean, it's also important to be aware like the local policies, because let's say if you're in the Midwest, a lot of chemicals from agriculture drain into the Mississippi River, and that drains to the Gulf Coast, creating these places called dead zones. So being part of that, and also just educating yourself on just the ocean and things that are happening. There was a report that came out, this 2020 World Atlas of Ocean or something like that, and it provided, and I can provide the link in here that you can check out, but it just compacted everything dealing with ocean health and conservation and sustainability. I think it's 100 pages, but is kind of just talks about what this is the state of the ocean. As I could find that and try to drop it into the link. But these are some things you can probably try to get into if you're looking for something like that.
And I forgot to mention my own organization. I always do this. It's Big Blue and You. I co-founded this org with my mom actually 12 years ago in Miami, where I'm from. And we focus on young people and connecting them with scientists and artists who are a part of ocean conservation, whether it's through research or through their artworks. And we host events around the world, bringing those local artists and scientists together with young people. And we just have such a blast. And again, it's about access, the same point that Paul brought up. Access to the ocean is really important. In fact, our flagship event that we created back in like 2011 called Art by the Sea, where it's a festival celebrating the ocean through art and drumming and dance. We hosted at a historic park called Virginia Key Beach Park, which is across the street from UM's graduate campus, as well as the NOAA Southeast Fisheries Lab. It's right back there, but that particular beach used to be the only beach for people of color back during Jim Crow and segregation. So it's considered the Black Beach of Miami. And now, yeah, it's a National Historic Site and it's absolutely stunning. You get to see, you can see Biscayne Bay and the Atlantic. It's a barrier island, and it's just an awesome place. So if you're ever in Miami, anybody who's watching, I hope you will show up once the world opens up again and join us out there for Art by the Sea.
Awesome. And so we're gonna, I guess, jump to questions. So there's a question in chat that I went over, but it's from Harold Huggins. It says, do you concur that the commercial fishing is far more dangerous than plastic pollution and oil spills? Seaspiracy 2021, and he provides the transcript that talks about that. And so, what are your opinions about that?
So I guess the first thing I would ask is, what is your definition of oil pollution? Is it just oil that comes from something like the Deepwater Horizon, or does that extend to the CO2 that's going into the atmosphere and into the ocean because of the burning of fossil fuels? So to me, that all of that excess CO2, that is oil pollution. Okay, we're taking carbon that used to be sequestered in the crust of the earth, and we're releasing it back into the atmosphere and into the ocean. That is pollution. It's the same as fire retardants. It's the same as PCBs. And so, is overfishing a bigger problem than that? I actually don't think so. Because at a certain point, you take out so much fish that fishery no longer is financially viable. So at a certain point, and there may be some exceptions to this, like bluefin tuna may be so expensive that we could literally hunt them to extinction. But as a marine biodiversity scientist, outside of some marine mammals, there are very few examples where we have driven marine organisms to extinction. We can drive them to very, very low levels. And I think with fisheries, we can do it to the point where those fisheries are no longer commercially viable, but those species will still be there. And eventually, hopefully they'll recover. That's not always the case. But, I think that, in terms of what we're doing with warming of the global oceans, causing coral bleaching, causing the disruption of ocean communities where, like we had sea snakes in Malibu. It's like, they should not be here, but we have ocean warming. The ocean acidification that's coming as a byproduct of the fossil fuel burning, to me, that is the biggest ultimate threat to the ocean, because that's cutting off the food webs of the ocean at the knees. And if we kill the foundation of marine food webs, there is nothing else to build on. And so, it's going to be really hard to catch the last squid in the ocean. It's going to be really hard to catch the last tuna in the ocean. But we could, by reducing primary productivity, cause a lot of ocean food webs to collapse. And so, if you consider CO2 pollution, I would say that is long-term the larger threat than actual commercial harvesting.
And oh,
Can I just say one thing on that? I mean, my response is simple in that I don't know if it's wise for us to dissect different traumas or different problems that are happening right now. We know that they're all equally important, and we need different people to champion individual things. So for you, Harold, it's like, what's most important to you right now? What do you think that you can personally get involved with? How you can push the needle forward? Like, decide on that and then give it your all. We need everybody to do that, whether you're a scientist, whether you're a politician, an actor, an educator. Like, we need everybody to choose something and start there, because I can't, for me, I can't wrap my mind around, like, oh my God, I don't know what is more important. I just love the ocean. I just want to see it survive.
Very well said.
thank you. All right, and then I guess if you have any questions, feel free to use the raise your hand icon if you want to verbally say something, or put it in the chat. Next one is from Harold, and I think this is a question probably directed to Paul, since you do this type of research. How realistic is genetically modified fish through toxic waste, i.e., the RNA component of human telomerase?
I'm actually not aware of that. I don't know about that research. I can say that, what I do know of genetically modified seafood, so specifically salmon, they do a lot to make them grow bigger, faster, with less food. And the movie talks about the pollution associated with that, the sea lice that's associated with that. But as a geneticist, the biggest concern that we have with that is that those GMO fish, they escape and they interbreed with native populations. And when that happens, they can actually do a significant amount of damage to these populations that have evolved to local conditions over thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And so, I think in general, once you start messing around with the genes of these organisms, if there's any chance of these things getting loose in the wild, and there's a big chance of it in the ocean, there's just simply there's no structure we've ever built in the ocean that the ocean can't destroy. That's just how the ocean works. And those genes will get loose and they can cause problems. So, I don't know about the specific RNA issue you're talking about, but in general, I think it's better to not go there if we can help it.
Great. Are there any other questions or comments from anybody in the audience?
I guess I just wanted to pitch in a little bit on genetic effects due to environmental things. Our research group, the Hoffman Lab, I'll put a link in there, but we do think about how environmental aspects can modify, DNA. So we just talked about PCO2 pollution that's going on in our oceans, and ocean acidification can have generational effects, such that maybe mamas can't really provision their babies the same way. So while toxic waste is one of those things in our environment that can have those generational effects, we know that it's PCO2, we know that it's ocean acidification and ocean warming that can also have generational effects. So yes, toxic waste, but we also have to think more broadly when we think about that. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
Awesome. DeMarcus, I have to jump in here. I do have to run and deal with this LA traffic to get to another destination. So I'm gonna hop off, but thank you for the invitation to be here. It's been a joy to share space with everybody. I really appreciate it. I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. Thank you. It's about to wrap it up. Thank you for everybody for coming. Thank you for the panelists. If you have any more questions, I'm pretty sure you can feel free to reach out to them.